The U.S. Department of Education announcing today that more than 4 million student loan borrowers are enrolled in the Biden administration's new SAVE plan. It's a plan aimed to help borrowers specifically with student loan forgiveness. Bailey Peterson tonight with more on the plan and what some South Dakotans are saying about it. Bailey.
Brian, with the Biden administration's new SAVE plan coming to the forefront, many borrowers have already applied. Known as the Saving on a Valuable Education Income-Driven Repayment Plan, a single borrower who makes less than about $15 an hour will not have to make any payments, and borrowers earning above that amount would save more than $1,000 a year on their payments compared to their IDR plans. Lisa Hager, SDSU Associate Professor of Political Science, says this plan is a way to reach more of a compromise from the original plans.
Everybody seems to kind of agree that this is a better approach than what they tried in the past that was ultimately struck down by the Supreme Court.
With the new plan going more by the books, she explained the approach it would take.
Folks who are making less than $30,000 a year would have essentially a zero loan payment, with the idea being that currently they could then focus on their more immediate needs, and then once their income rose above that $30,000, then they would be expected to pay on their student loans.
Emma Hughes and Kylie Sally are students at Augustana University. They shared how loan forgiveness programs can be beneficial.
I feel like it's definitely great for students to have the opportunity to go and get an education, so any assistance in that is always good.
They believe loan forgiveness can help encourage people from different walks of life to pursue higher education.
I'd say if people have a goal one day to become a certain, like an educator, a nurse, or whatever, that they have that opportunity is always good.
Yeah, I think money shouldn't be a limiting factor for people.
With around 10,700 borrowers in South Dakota already enrolled in SAVE, Hager discussed the timing of the upcoming election.
Right now, this is becoming a conversation about the differences between the two parties and the cost of this particular program. And I think that will help both parties as they campaign with the upcoming presidential election.
The Biden-Harris administration has already approved more than $117 billion in targeted relief for 3.4 million student loan borrowers at this point. Brian?
All right, Bailey, thank you.